Welcome back, everybody. It's going to be our second episode of the Playbook series. In this episode, we're going to be talking about the overnight fade trade. So first, we're going to start off by talking about what you need for this trade, and then we'll go into how you actually trade the overnight fade. So starting off, you're going to need a volume profile session. So go to the indicators, go to technicals, profiles, and then session volume profile. Here are the settings that we use for our overnight session. We have a custom session. We started at 6 p.m. Eastern the previous day, and it goes all the way until the open of the current day, so 9:30 a.m. Eastern. We have it set to the New York time zone, which is Eastern. We have volume set to total. Value area volume set to 70. Rows, number of rows. Row size 100. And the style settings are pretty much just personal preference. They don't really affect this trade at all, but here are my style settings. We have that set to 16%, that one at 40, and that is pretty much all you need. We highly recommend pairing this with momentum indicators. If you guys have the DBT Momo, the OTG trading bot, or if you guys have Delta footprints, we highly recommend pairing this with the Delta footprints as well. Okay, so what we need for the overnight fade to occur, we need a one-sided overnight session. And what we mean by one-sided is we need it to be very one-directional. So we want it to be heading in either a complete uptrend or a complete downtrend. And this can have a few pullbacks along the way, but realistically, we want it to be a very obvious trend in one direction. And when we look at that volume profile, we want it to be imbalanced. What we mean by imbalanced is we want it to have the majority of the volume either on the high or on the low. The final thing we look for this trade are very clear LVNs. If you guys are not familiar with a lot of these terms we're using for volume profile, we don't have time to cover them in this video. Go over our volume profile series that we have on YouTube. We have a volume profile playlist. Be sure to check that out. But okay, so we need to see very clear LVNs. And what we mean by LVNs are these little low volume nodes. So we have the high volume nodes, obviously with these big clusters of volume. Then we have these LVNs that have very low volume. So when we open up on the current day, so we open up around 9:30, we want to be away from those LVNs because we need those LVNs as our targets. So in this case, the three targets that we would look for are these three LVNs right here. We have the 46.23, the 46.15, and the 46.05. If I hide these lines, you can see where we're generating those targets. We have that LVN right there, that LVN right there, and then finally this one right there. The problem with the overnight fade trade is it depends on where those LVNs are. The LVNs are not going to be super obvious on every single overnight fade trade. So it really depends on how close those LVNs are to the current open and if they're giving you that risk reward that you like to trade. Okay, so now we know what we're going to be targeting. We see the one directional overnight session. We see the very obvious LVN levels. Now, how do we actually get in this trade? What is the entry for this trade? So what we look for our actual entry is we want to wait for the day to open up at 9:30, and we want to see weakness on that trend. So in this case, we have a very obvious uptrend. So if we want to take this as a reversal, as a fade, we need to see buyer weakness on that opening session within that first 30 minutes to that first hour. Typically, we only like trading overnight fades within 9:30 and 10:30 a.m. within that first hour of the day. If it does not show you weakness on that trend within that first hour, then you typically do not want to take this as a fading trade. You would have to use some other trade for your entry. But okay, so within that first hour, what we want to see, and I'm going to go down to the 5-minute here, and we're going to let this play, and I'll show you exactly what we saw on this day here. Okay, so we let it play for a little bit here. That's the first 15 minutes of the day. So right away, we are seeing a little bit of weakness because look at all of these candles. This is the opening candle right here, and then all 3 of these are right after the open. Look at what happens on all 4 of these candles. You fail to close towards the high of those candles. You're showing weakness on the high of every single one of these candles. And if we let it play for a little bit longer, we can see that it actually starts to push downward. It starts to show that the sellers are willing to push this downward. So what we would do at this point is if we had our footprint pulled up, if we saw weakness on that first attempt to break higher, we could take that short. If you wanted to be a little bit more passive, you could wait to see if there's actual sell pressure pushing that down, and you can either take that short as a initiative shorter, which is a very aggressive short entry on that low, or you could wait for a potential pullback to where you were originally showing weakness. Now, I don't have the footprint chart pulled up here, but what I will do, I will pull up a volume profile of this little opening session. And what we can see on this volume profile here is every time it attempts to break, you can see that volume falls off very rapidly. So if you guys follow my volume profile series, you know that when we look for these breakout trades, you need to see a dominant node start to form outside of that value area. So let's say the value area is right here. In order for this to continue this impulse, we would need to see a dominant node start to form outside of that value area. We are not forming a dominant node here. They are showing weakness with that volume and that delta. In this case, we don't see the delta, but if you were looking at the delta on another chart, you would be able to see it on the footprint showing a clear weakness on the high here. So if you see that volume and delta weakness on that high, so we have the overnight high right here, we can take that as our entry. So in this case, let's say, and I can pull up a short trade here. Let's say we take our short when we start to see that weakness. We want to put our stop loss above that overnight high if the overnight high is really close to our open. If it's not close to your open, then you will have to use the high of the opening range as your stop loss. So in this case, the high of the opening range would be somewhere around there. That's way too close. We want to give it some more room than that. We don't want to put our stop loss only 1.5 points away. Typically for this type of trade, I am willing to take around a 5-point stop loss. So let's say we put our stop loss at 5 points here. And then our targets, let's make sure that we can get that risk to reward that we like to see. Typically 1.5 to 2.0 for our risk to reward. So if we go to a 30-minute here, let's see if we can get that risk to reward. So the first target is already giving us that risk to reward that we like to see. That's a 1.7 risk to reward. Second target is a 3.3. Third target is a 5.3. So the answer is yes, we very clearly can get that 1.5 or higher risk to reward on this trade. So the trade is worth taking if we can get that entry around that high. Okay, so let's ask ourselves, if we missed that entry, is it okay to take the entry on the aggressive side when we start to show weakness towards the downside? So in this case, we would be pulling our trade, let's say down to when it starts to lose this support here. In this case, we typically like to have a maximum of a 5-point stop. This would not be a great trade here because our stop loss is below the overnight high and it's below the opening session high, the opening range high. So in this case, we do not want to take that aggressive entry on the low there. We want to take the entry when it starts to show the weakness, or if we missed that, we have to wait for some kind of pullback. So this would be the proper entry somewhere around this weakness right here. Let's go ahead and play this and let's see if we would have gotten our entry on a pullback or we would have missed it. It looks like we would have missed it in this case. So if you did not take that trade right away around the open, which sadly, most of the time, this is going to be the case for the overnight trade. You have to take that trade as soon as you see the weakness coming in around 9:30 to 10 o'clock. Sometimes you will get that pullback around 10 to 10:30. So in this case, sadly, we did not get that pullback. Okay, so let's say we got our entry when it started to show that weakness right during the open. Stop loss is going to be 5 points away. Typically, we like to use a 5-point stop loss. If you want to tighten it up, it can be above the overnight high or above the opening session high. Let's just leave it at 5 points for now. We are going to take off piece by piece when it starts to hit these LVNs. So in this case, we have 3 LVNs. So we want to split our trade up 3 different ways. Or if you are happy with the risk reward on the closer targets, you can take out a bigger piece on the closer targets and then leave a runner, maybe 25% or less for that farther out LVN. So let's go down to a smaller time frame here, and I'll just go ahead and let this play out. This day was pretty much a perfect example of the overnight fade. It's not always going to be this easy. It's not always going to hit all these LVNs right away. Typically, it will give you more of a chop as it goes down into these LVNs. In this day, it was just pretty much a complete reversal right out the gate. Okay, so what we would have done here, we would have taken a piece off at our first LVN. And then at that point, because we are closing a good piece of our trade, we can bring our stop loss to break even, or we can put it in profit. In this case, the first LVN is about 8.5 points away from our entry. So we probably could bring our trade, our stop loss, the remaining size of our trade, to a small profit. So in this case, I'd probably say putting it in profit a few points. This is obviously going to depend on the trade. It's not going to be set in stone for every single overnight fade. Just see how far away you are from your entry. Look at the current volatility and ask yourself if it's worth it to pull under your entry. In this case, it's 8 points away, so I think it is worth it to put our stop in profit. Okay, now that we've moved our stop in profit, we just want to let this thing run to our remaining targets. Okay, so in this case here, we hit our second target. Now that our second target is hit, you can continue to trail your stop loss. Now, sadly, with this particular trade, what we would have done is we most likely would have pulled our stop loss to where our first target was. So we would have pulled it somewhere around here, and that last pullback there most likely would have stopped out our trail. Pretty much anybody is going to get stopped out on a move like this because that is a 10-point bounce, even more if you take it from the low. That is a 16-point bounce. So very likely anybody who took that overnight fade, that opening sell-off, they are going to be trailed out on that bounce. And that is completely okay. You hit 2 of your targets and you got trailed out for about 8 points at the least. So, or at the bare minimum, I should say. You're very happy with that trade. You're not going to be mad about that. If you did leave your runner for a break-even stop, then in this case, you would have hit your final target, which was that LVN around 27 points away. So a couple things that I like to do here when we are determining whether we want to take this entry. Like we were saying earlier, it's best to combine this with delta or some type of momentum indicator. What I like to do is I like to keep an eye on the bots and the DBT Momo to see if we have weak momentum and are the bots giving us sell signals when that trend is starting to shift. The bots are really good at staying in the trend as long as they can. So if they're telling you that trend is coming to an end, it most likely is coming to an end. So in this case here, we had the sell signal come in at 9:49 on the 1 minute chart. It rolled over into the 3 minutes. Do I have this on the proper time? Let me see here. I have to zoom out a little bit more. It rolled over into the 3 minute. Actually, it was already in a 3 minute sell from 9 o'clock. So it stayed in a 3 minute sell. You had a couple of choppy buys there. And then after that pullback, you went back into a sell around 1 o'clock. Same thing with the 5 minute, rolled into a sell at around 10 o'clock. You got caught into a buy on that really big bounce, back into a sell around 1 o'clock. Same thing for the 15 minute. Got into a sell, you had a buy on that big bounce, and then right back into a sell. So pretty much every single bot was telling you that this trend was in fact coming to an end. So as long as you see weak volume on that the buy side, weak delta on the buy side, and then all of our other indicators are indicating that the trend is coming to an end, we are okay to take that as an overnight fade. Now, pretty much what you would have done here is you would have taken profit on that first LVN, hopefully taken profit on the second LVN, and then you would have gotten trailed out on the rest around that first target. It's very hard to hold a runner for that final target because of that very strong bounce around 11 o'clock to 12 o'clock. Okay, so long story short, what do we look for the overnight fade? You want to look for a one-directional overnight session. You want to look for weakness on the open. So if the one-directional overnight session is bullish, we want to see weakness on the buy side, and we want to see more strength on the sell side. We will put our stop above the overnight high. If it's too far away, we will put our stop above the opening session high, the opening range high. And our targets are based on where those LVNs are during that overnight session. We will piece out our trade depending on how many LVNs there are, and we will try to leave a runner for that final overnight LVN. But okay, guys, that was the overnight fade trade. If you guys have any questions on this, please put it in the comments below. I will get to them as soon as possible. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. Make sure to hit that like button if you did. I will be seeing you guys in the next one. Have a good day.